Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Wednesday, the 30th of July. Reading through Acts with McShane, we read chapter 17 today, which begins with Paul in Thessalonica. In verse 1, when Paul and his companions had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. And he goes on, this Jesus whom I'm preaching to is that Messiah. So he goes into a Jewish context. He goes into a synagogue and he argues from the Scriptures. He draws on the foundations of their faith and points them in the direction of Jesus. A little later he ends up in Athens. And we're told he goes, wanders around Athens and he sees all these different temples and idols, and he recognizes there's this great spiritual hunger. And he starts discussing this with, again, the Jews in the synagogue and in the marketplace. And a number of people have questions. And in verse 22, we're told a group of Epicurean Stoic philosophers began to debate with him and saying, you've got interesting ideas. They end up inviting him to come to the Areopagus, great gathering of the elite, the erudite, the philosophers of the city, where they would sit and share ideas. And they invite Paul to come and talk to them about this new idea that he's bringing to them. And we read in 22, then Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and he said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. And so he begins by recognizing their spiritual need, and he positions the gospel in their thinking, and he says, you already recognize that you don't know all the gods. There are some gods you don't know. So let me tell you about one of these gods that you don't know. And you've recognized there are gods like that. And so he links into what they're already doing. And we continue, and as he's discussing with them, he ends up quoting, and he says the following to them. He makes this quote, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And as he does that, he's quoting there from poets and from their philosophers. This isn't scripture. And so this, for in him we live and move and have our being, is a quote from Epimenides. And some of the poets, which was Aratus, one of the Stoic philosophers, we are his offspring. He doesn't mention the Scriptures. But what he does do is he links the gospel he's sharing to what they already have, the foundations of their thinking and their perspective. And that's how the gospel is shared. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And so if you're talking to people from a Christian background, if you're talking to people who were part of the church, you're presented in one way. If you go to China, to people who know nothing about the Scriptures or the stories of faith, you'll have a different approach to that. And if you go into parts of Europe which have become completely paganized, you almost go back to the very beginning again, because people might have heard that there is a Bible but know nothing about it. They don't know that there's a New and an Old Testament there. And so depending on who you're speaking to, your approach is different. And we see that with Paul. And so for me, that's an encouragement to, as we share the gospel, to relate to the people. We don't just give them a single story. We relate to them, we speak to them, we find out about them, and we integrate our sharing with where they are. So be challenged by that thought, be encouraged, and remember to pray for the people that are out in the world, sharing the gospel in very different situations, in very different ways, but all aiming to let Jesus be known and his kingdom grow. Be blessed.